Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you all here. We're probably going to have people joining us a little bit at a time because there's been some glitches in signing in. The Netroots Nations people are taking care of this as we speak. I want to welcome you wholeheartedly with my co-host, Robert Bray, and our tech guru, Omar, who's also on as well. Please chat, or if you're having any problem getting on or you can't hear, and we'll try to take care of it as soon as possible. You are in Beyond the Tweet, how activists can build money and power. And I'm so glad that you're here. You're my heroes. I'm so excited that we're going to be doing this work together. There's many good things and good roles in social justice, and raising the money with great communication is a big one. I want to thank Netroots Nation for including this webinar in this really important Netroots Nation conference at home. And I want to thank all of you again for being here. We'll be together around 50 minutes, and we'll have a few minutes at the end to be able to just chat with each other and to do this work. So I'd like to ask you, if you would, to put in the chat one word about how you're feeling about fundraising right now. So if you could put it in there, that would be great. I just want to get a sense of who's in the room. And since there's so many people, we can't ask you each. We're going to get to know you a little bit that way. So thank you for doing that. Somebody said stressed. Let's see the rest of you. Hopefully this will help calm you down from the stress or give you some joyous things. Encouraged, somebody wrote. That's great. Intrigued, Adela wrote. Great, thanks. Let's go for one or two more. Somebody said they're doing a lot of canvassing and they can't right now. Somebody else said she's feeling dizzy. Whoa, gonna help you feel better. And somebody else said intimidated. Okay, well, this session should be better than a bottle of Advil. This session should make you feel really good and really have some ideas about how to do fundraising, how to get involved with this, to know that you're not alone, and to know that despite the craziness in the world right now, there is really good possibilities in fundraising and communication to make you the strongest movement possible. I want to offer healthy vibes. If you or anybody in your family or your friends are not feeling well, I hope they'll feel better, whether it's COVID or something else. And I also want to give a woohoo that we've got a team finally that we can work for to make the government be stronger and better than it currently is. So again, I'm so glad that you're here to be on the tweet. I'm going to turn this over now to my friend and co-host Robert Bray, who's going to walk us through the agenda.
Hi, everybody. You should be able to see the agenda up on the screen now. This is Robert Bray. I'm Communications Director of Neo Philanthropy, and I'm very honored and pleased to be here with Margie. And this is my third, maybe fourth Netroots Nation, first one for all of us online. We're all getting used to it, but it's happening. So what we're planning on doing for the next 45 minutes or so is kind of taking you on a journey beyond the tweet. And what we mean by that is really unpacking what it takes to tell stories and to communicate persuasive messages in a way that really motivate people to donate and motivate people to take action. So first we'll talk, I'm gonna walk through the goals of the session. We're going to share with you some findings from a survey that we did of social justice activists on their fundraising and communications practices. And I think some of you may see yourselves in some of the results of that survey. Margie's going to walk you through some best practices and tips on fundraising, and specifically individual donors fundraising, not so much how to write a proposal for a foundation, by the way. That's another workshop. I'm going to show you a case study that's very exciting. We're calling it lightning in a bottle, and what happens when an organization suddenly finds itself in a place where they can seize the moment and radically change their culture around communications and fundraising, resulting in some very impressive metrics that show membership and social media and donations all increasing. And I think you're going to really be impressed by that. And then we'll have breaks for the questions throughout. And then we'll conclude with what we call our secret sauce, which is, if you don't learn anything else, this is the special ingredients you should remember going forward from the session in terms of how you can improve your fundraising and communications work.
Great, excellent. So Robert, let's turn to the goals of the session. So we want this to be something that's going to make your soul feel happier about fundraising and your brain feel happier with, here's some specific things to do to help your work doing it. It's about 50 minutes. Robert's here from San Francisco, so he's going to speak in a really calm voice of somebody who's just been in yoga a few hours ago. Me, I'm in Brooklyn. So I want you to strap your seatbelt on and get ready for a ride. We can get through all of our things today and you can all feel better about fundraising. So we're going to offer practical tips on fundraising and expanding and diversifying where your money's coming from. Get that money, honey.
We're also going to emphasize what we call an integrated approach, so that your development work and your communications thinking and your organizing and policy operations are all sort of working in synergy, as opposed to all going off and doing their own thing. So that's going to be something you're going to see today, emphasize this integrated approach to fundraising and communications.
And then finally, we want to spark your curiosity to think, well, we haven't done it that way before, but don't stop there. Don't say we don't do that. Think, well, we don't do that now, but maybe we could do that. To encourage you to take risks in how you're raising your money and to think outside the box of what you've been doing before. I know you've heard that phrase a million times, but genuinely to think more about this. You raise money from foundations now and not donors. Now's the time for donors. So, for example, we're going to spark your curiosity, spark your risk-taking, thinking outside the box, and doing really kick-ass fundraising for the movement. Okay.
So let's just start a little bit what we call the state of play. So Margie and I did a survey earlier this year on social justice grassroots organizations, particularly in the immigrant rights and the anti-human trafficking field. These organizations are part of For Freedom's Fund and the Human Trafficking Fund of Neo Philanthropy. We surveyed about 55 organizations. Some of you on this call may even work for some of them. We measured several categories, about 9 categories total, including planning, tech, data, and evaluation. And we were somewhat surprised and then somewhat not surprised by some of the findings. We did this because we really want to get a sense of where these two social justice movements are, and maybe by extension, other social justice movements in terms of fundraising and comms. Like, are these organizations, many of our grantees, are they positioned to tap donors? Are they positioned to seize fundraising moments when they happen? And most of all, is their revenue diversified so they have a strong foundation, a diverse foundation of revenue, not vulnerable to, say, just foundation grants? So the highest scores we got were in leadership engagement. So organizations said that their executive director and other exec leadership were involved in fundraising, which is good. You presume that's probably under job description. We were somewhat surprised to see that the high self-graded level of collaboration and communication. Our hunch was that maybe that wasn't happening as much, but the group said that was happening more than we thought, and we were pleased. The execution and implementation, like getting the major donor appeals out and sending out the end of year fundraiser or staging the gala event, that was all happening and it was all being executed. People felt good about that. The lowest scores we got shows where the weaknesses in organizations are around their fundraising and communications. Was really telling to us. That includes taking evaluation data and incorporating it and the research in determining fundraising goals and strategies. We're just not seeing that on the level that we really want to in social justice organizations. And what that does then, it impacts the ability to communicate stories and frames in a way that's going to resonate with potential funders who might be interested, as the data shows, in particular kinds of issues. So most of the organizations kind of gave themselves a mediocre grade on evaluation. And most of the organizations said that there's really no systematic approach, that how they measure the evaluation success of their fundraising is kind of like on hunches, like, well, what worked and what didn't? And, you know, did we hit a couple of goals? And that was about it. So we learned from this survey that there really wasn't an intentional link to donor priorities. Like they really weren't probing what the donors were looking to learn about. And then we found this organization, Nebraska Appleseed. So Nebraska Appleseed is an organization based in the Midwest. It's a multi-progressive organization, multi-progressive issue. I know them. I've been there. I think both Margie and I have been to Nebraska Appleseed and work with them. It's a fantastic group. They, among other things, are part of For Freedom's Fund working on immigrant rights. And their development director, Nick Swarzek, and that's him down here, really smart, friendly guy. I'm throwing this slide up here. I know it has a lot of text, but I just want to call your attention to a couple of things. In blue, you're seeing the staff member or department responsible for something, and in red, you're seeing what they do. So what this quote from Nick is about is it's lifting up this integrated approach, how at Nebraska Appleseed, it's a full team event around their development. So for example, their communications director works with the program and executive staff, and they all develop messages, which then the development team uses to frame fundraising copy. For the big campaigns, what we call the all-in campaigns, ballot initiatives in the state capitol, you know, legislation moving, the development director actually works to create the message box, which for those of us in comms, what that means is values, problem, solution, action, and takes that message box and uses it to determine strategy for engaging contributors in the kinds of advocacy that's going to resonate with them. So you're seeing that overlap of those functions in an integrated way. For the classic year-end fundraising letter, of course, every organization does that, right? And Lord knows, 2020, that year-end this year-end fundraising letter is going to be a real doozy considering what's been happening in this country. And so the development director, the entire development team, the executive director, they all come together and they outline key priorities and initiatives. And that's what they put in that year-end report. So this is an example of what we learned from our survey of how one organization really has set the bar high. And we want to invite you who work in similar organizations to really think of how you can bring in together those different functions to work in a more coordinated, integrated way around communications and fundraising.
I just want to add to what Robert said, that Nebraska Appleseed, during this time when Nick was there and they were doing this work, tripled their number of donors, tripled their staff, tripled the ways, the sophistication and the nuanced way that they're doing fundraising. So in a nutshell, it works to do this, to make this happen. So great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few best practices about what we've learned and what we've noticed from the most successful organizations. If you have comments or thoughts about this, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A, even though it might not be in the form of a question, but we'd love to hear what you can see, what you think. I also wanted to give a shout out to Rachel, who's on this call now, from Haas Jr., who helped to do this project, this survey that Robert was just talking about through Haas Jr., and where we found out all this really interesting work. I didn't introduce myself earlier because I figured you'd read my bio, but I want to say that I was the former executive director of 2 different foundations, and I left to help groups raise the money, social justice groups, because so many were addicted to just getting money from funders. And a lot of groups now are doing much, much better and also raising money from individuals. Communications and fundraising working together is one of the crucial things to make this work, which I know I've been saying a lot. A couple of places where this is happening really well is on Facebook, both what you put on the front of your Facebook page and how people use Facebook to raise money, like for their birthday or in honor of a wedding. The real estate on the front page of your website is crucial. If you have a fundraising campaign going on and you have a ballot initiative going on, Both teams have to work with each other to say, what do we want potential donors or current donors to see when they go to our website to review this? And research shows us that the majority of people who go visit your webpage are people who are looking to make a donation, think about making a donation, are currently making a donation. So how are you going to use that on your website, and how do you stay in touch with each other to do that well? You want to be able to tell a story for donors in a donor newsletter where it's completely focused on donors. What does that mean? You want to put pictures, you want to put captions, you want to put headlines on there. You want to give people a sense of what they've made happen in your work. So the one you mail in the snail mail should be rich and juicy and have all these ideas in there. The one you do on email should be a quick hit. Want to just think of somebody who's going to skim it and look at that really lightly and move on. And then finally, you want to look at major donor letters. I know really, really good fundraising staff who writing for them is a real struggle. And the communication staff writes easily, but the fundraising staff and the communication staff is never think, oh, maybe I can talk to communications and they'll help us write this. They'll help us do the follow-up email to this. So I lifted it up here because both teams should do this. And I know there's a lot of digital people on this call. You might be saying, oh, well, I'm in charge of what shows up on our webpage, even though the fundraising team is writing the letters that go out to the donors. How can you also be working with the other people, the other departments, to make sure this is done well? Robert, next slide. I cannot stress enough about the power of relationships. I come from a community organizing background where relationship is where we start. You want to really focus on building relationships. This is not, we don't know anybody, let's go raise money from them. This is a lot about building relationships. So it's not one and done. Somebody comes in because you're a canvasser, they stay with you over time. There's been a lot of discussion lately. Vu Lee has been one of the people leading this, about how to make fundraising more responsive to our communities that we work with. Often being community-centric and donor-centric are pitted against each other. I think we need to do both. We want to keep the community, keep the people for why this work is going forward, what we're trying to make happen, and we want to know what makes donors tick, what makes a donor, whether it's a $5 a month donor or a wealthy donor, want to give to this work, want to show up and do things, and not, as the second bullet says, as our savior, even as the white savior, but our solidarity. I can show up and be there with my dollars to make a difference in the work that we're all trying to do. What does that look like? What is the wording? What is the relationship? And finally, that we make a sense of urgency, not a sense of panic, but a sense of urgency. What would compel somebody to read your letter, read your email and say, I must make a donation now? So in the relationships that we're building, in the way that we're communicating, in the way that we're thanking people, this will continue. You get the sense of this here. Next slide, Robert. The story and the message really matters. You know, a lot of times you want to write in a newsletter, or we want to write someplace about our organization. Oh, we hired a new staff person. Oh, we did this thing. But really, your donor is giving to you not because of strengthening the organization often, but because of the issue and the constituency and the region you're working in. They want a stronger Baltimore. They want African-American students to do better in school. They care about reproductive rights. So you want to be thinking about that in the way that you're writing to the donors. And you want to make sure that the donor knows that it made a difference that they gave this donation. And what difference did it make? How well did you do? What worked and how did it work in strengthening both building and advocacy and organizing lens, which Netroot Nation's donors are going to come to this work through. So how can you help them to see that in the best way? And finally, you want to make the donor part of the story. You don't want to just see them as dollar signs. You want to be able to say, through your donation, this happened, but you also want to write to them to say, will you sign this petition? Would you want to go with us on this bus to downtown? So you take on and you see and you build a relationship with the total person, the total donor. Next slide. Okay, best practices, segment, segment, segment. I know it could be a relief to all of us here to just write one letter, be one and done, and the letter's going to talk to everybody and all of your potential donors. In fact, you need to know your audience and focus what you're writing to that audience. What brought that person in? If you do leadership development and you also do C4 work, what do you think the donor that you're trying to bring in is interested in How do you write to them to let them know that? One size does not fit all. In fact, sometimes if you write only one fundraising letter, it's like shouting in in a noisy high school cafeteria. Nobody hears you. So you want to think about who you're writing to and what do you want them to do and what's the connection. You also want to thank people for what they've done. You don't have to bow down before them, but people should know that of all the places they could have given money to, giving money to your organization made a big difference to your movement, and that you appreciate it and you want them to come back again and to make that be possible. So that could be whether that person has signed up, maybe they gave you a one-time donation of $25. You wrote back and said, hey, that's terrific. Would you consider increasing to giving $5 a month for the next 12 months, becoming a monthly sustainer? So the long haul is going to get you more money that way. And then you want to write to them if they say yes and be in touch and say thank you. Or if it's a major donor, or if you get a cadre of 50 people, your closest activists who say, we're all going to sign up to get people to give money in honor of our birthdays on Facebook. You want to thank all of them for doing that. Next one, Robert. Okay, and finally, I know there's a pandemic. I know there's been a lot of horrendous racism, classism, really, really some terrible things going on. We could sit here for a long time and talk about this. I am with you on that. But you know what else is going on? There are a lot of people who want to make donations. There are a lot of people who want to show up to demonstrations, can't always, and this is the way that they can make a donation to the work. They want to show up for you, but what we have to do, we have to ask them. The number one reason why people say, when they suddenly gave to something that they never gave before, why didn't you give before? You already knew that this was an issue. Number one reason, nobody asked me. We want to be the ones that ask them clearly, specifically, with joyousness, because fundraising is a joyous thing to do, and most people who give like giving. So I would love to work with you to get you over your fear of asking or your yucky feeling about asking, and make this be the thing that you understand the most. Donors want to give. We have to give them a place and a reason and a feel-good way to make that donation. So I'm going to stop there and see if any questions or comments have come in the Q&A or in the chat, or if you want to think about any question now.
Oh, we did have one question, by the way. Are the slides going to be available? Yes. Apparently, Netroots Nation is not creating a repository for all the session slides that all the presenters are using. So we have to send them out individually, which is cool. We're happy to do that. So we'll have our email addresses at the end. And I believe you can go to the presenter bio page at Netroots Nation 2020 and find our information there too. So yes,
and our last slide is going to give our information too. So just get ready to write that down when you see it, and we'll be able to get that to you too. So
great. So any other questions before we continue? Because you've heard us talk a little bit about the state of fundraising and communications in the grassroots field. You've heard us talk a little bit about best practices before we go into a case study of how one group's doing it.
There is a question, Robert, and it says, should you include an ask in your thank you? Like, thanks for this one-time donation, P.S. become a monthly donor. I would say you want it, it shouldn't feel like, hey, thanks for inviting me for dinner. Can I come next week? You want to leave that like, thank you right there. Thank you for that donation. That was really great. Really appreciate it. I give a little space, and then I would write back again and said, last month you gave a donation of $25. I'm asking you now, because of what's going on and because of your generous spirit, if you would take that $25 and become a monthly sustainer. And I think you want to experiment for how this is happening. Sierra Club doesn't even take any one-time donations. They right away turn them into monthly donations. So you know what we said earlier, risk-taking, try things out, same thing here. I would say make sure that the donor feels thanked well for what they just did for making that donation, and then also ask if they'll become a monthly sustainer. All right, Robert, why don't we go on?
Okay.
To the next one.
Great. And I just want to emphasize that in that message that Margie gave about generosity, gratitude and generosity messaging right now, especially during COVID, are very effective and very important, and are from the heart, and that resonates with donors. So keep that in mind as you're doing your appeals and what you think is going to work with folks. So let's go on. We want to talk about lightning in a bottle, one of our favorite subjects. So this is a story, and it really is a story, so hold on. We're going to go for a ride here. This is the story of one organization, National Immigration Law Center, otherwise known as NILC. The former communications director is actually joining us in the audience today, Adela de la Torre. She's here, and we're very grateful to her for sharing this with us. It's an organization that probably is similar to other national groups in that their profile in terms of fundraising is of the type where they have several hundred at the time. This is before November 2016. Recognize that date? That's election day, because guess what's going to happen? So before election day, they had several hundred individual donors, but I think they'd be first to admit that they were almost entirely dependent on foundation grants. In fact, I would say individual donations made up about less than 3% of NILC's total budget. I've heard NILC described as lovingly described as an organization of lawyer geeks. And that tended to show up in a lot of their communications, no fault of the communications staff, it's just how they talk, it's their voice. So a lot of their appeals, a lot of their newsletters was this lawyerly, overly explanation of kind of legal actions, and definitely one way to supporters. Well, that was reflected in the fact that there weren't a lot of openings of the e-newsletter. People were opening it, probably on a level that was average with industry standards, but they sensed that they were missing a lot of potential supporters. One thing NILC had going for it in November 2016 was it had terrific media relationships with reporters. And it had a political sophistication in that, and that they knew if Trump won the election, that their constituency, immigrants, would be threatened. So before Trump won, they anticipated the possibility of that happening. And when President Trump did win, one of his first actions, you may remember way back in 2016, was the Muslim ban executive order. So Trump banned Muslims from coming into the country and a variety of other things. And NILC filed the first lawsuit against that. That action put NILC in a media spotlight that was super bright for them at the time. And in fact, they ended up appearing on several lists of favorite organizations or most important organizations to donate to around that time because of their work in fighting the Muslim ban. All of a sudden, their social media exploded. All those reporter contacts resulted in tons of publicity. Their website crashed, literally, from donations to the point where the NILC staff thought they were under cyber attack. They weren't under cyber attack. People were trying to send them checks. Wow. And so they had to take action really quick and pivot. They also knew at the time, okay, this lightning has struck. We've been hit. How do we capture it? How do we use this moment to change our culture and how we do fundraising? And how do we keep those donors engaged in a way that it's not one-off, a check and thank you and goodbye. Hello, thank you, Martine campaign. So this is a really interesting story of the Thank You Martine campaign, because right after the Muslim ban, not long following that, Trump attacked DACA and he attacked Dreamers. And that put about 800,000 Dreamers in this country, made them vulnerable to deportation. One of those is Martin Batalla Vidal. That's him in the blue shirt there on the right. He was the plaintiff in a case that NILC, with its partners, brought challenging the Trump anti-DACA order. Martin himself received vicious and really horrible, I've seen some of them, racist and homophobic messages and hate on social media. NILC, sensing this moment, realized maybe now is the time to take a risk. Maybe now is the time to think outside the box. maybe now's not the time to ask our donors for a check as we normally would. Maybe now's the time to ask them for some love. So what they did is they invited their donors, all those new supporters and donors that had been driven to NILC's website, had been driven to the organization for their action on the Muslim ban. They invited them to send a letter of appreciation to Martin, thanking him for his courage and his perseverance at this time. That resulted in thousands of letters being received. All those messages were put together into an album. They were released to Martin on camera here with the staff and the executive director of NILC. That video was released through NILC's social media channels to the media and to its supporters. The supporters were invited to do something other than send a check and to show this and to communicate this sense of mutual caring. Like, we care about these people that we're sending checks of support, and that's important to us. So if you look at this, before I jump to what this resulted in, the takeaways here are the messages became less explainer, legal briefings, and more action-oriented, leading with the values, in this case, mutual caring. Each mail contained an action that was strategically connected to the issue at hand, in this case, defending DACA. So there's that messaging, communications, policy advocacy, integration we've been talking about. And they wanted to make sure that the supporters understood the connection between the action they were taking and the issue being raised. They wrapped all that in the story. They presented Martin, and what happened because of this was pretty incredible. Their donor base blew up. It went from several hundred to more than 15,000 after this action, and as a consequence of other actions too. The Twitter feed skyrocketed, also from about 15K to over 50,000, and Facebook growth was about the same. The Supreme Court, as you probably know, recently upheld DACA, at least for now, and Martin himself became a powerful LGBTQ and immigrant community leader, to the point where he persuaded, working with NILC and other organizations, he persuaded Grindr. Grindr is how do I describe it? It's an online social dating. It's a hookup site, okay? It's a hookup site in the gay community, and it's extremely popular. And Grindr was persuaded to launch and support the Dreamers campaign through its Grindr membership. And I don't know what the outcome of that yet is in terms of the numbers, but I know it was quite impressive, and it brought in a new audience at the intersection of queer community and immigrant rights, and Dreamers brought in a new audience into the issue. So it's an exciting story in terms of the convergence of all these factors, lightning strike, and then NILC finding the way to capture that, leverage it to bring those supporters into the organization in a way that empowers them, moves their policy agenda forward, and results in a lot of new members and a lot of new fundraising.
And Robert, it also built this man Martin's leadership, which was really great, the role that he took on to do. He was able to be his full self as a gay man in this work, and he has a Make the Road t-shirt on. It's not like NILC said, oh, you don't have our t-shirt on, you have to go change. It was the intersectionality of movement building and showing up in your full self, even with all of the people and other groups that you work with. Really, really great.
So before we close with our secret sauce, let's come back to questions. Now that you've heard about this case study involving NILC and how it created culture change in the organization, and how it uncovered and unlocked a new way to speak with donors, which resulted in, as you saw, those impacts, social media increases and new memberships. And you saw the empowerment of a person that it worked with, Martin himself, to become a new leader. Do you have any questions of how any of this might affect you? Like anything of how your organizations can can learn from these examples.
And I was interested also, Robert, in the people in the beginning when we asked, what word are you thinking about fundraising, who said, oh, I feel dizzy, or we can't do the canvassing that we were doing before, any of those things. Does this make you think, okay, there's things we could try, or you see this combination, or that sparks an even deeper question? I'll give you a minute to think about it. You can chat your answer. You can put it in the Q&A. Either way. So Robert, there's one person who wrote so they invited existing donors to give thanks instead of money, but they also asked non-donors to become donors in order to also take part in that.
Yeah, it's a combination of those. So they were inviting existing donors to do something other than just write another check. And in the process, they were identifying and bringing in those who were considered potential new donors. So both those communities of existing and potential donors come together to increase revenue in the organization and diversify it so they're not so dependent on foundation grants.
It also wasn't just, it wasn't in substitution for, it was in addition to, yes, we want you to make a donation, whether you can make a small donation or a very large donation. Yes, we want you to stay involved over time. And yes, we'd like to incorporate you if you're interested in other parts of our work, like doing this work and not just seeing you as dollar signs and that's it. So they didn't say, okay, can you write to Martina and that's it, we don't need money anymore? No, they did not do that. And they don't do that now. In the chat, Tim said, thank you. That's an awesome case study. Yes, they're really excited about that. That is really, really good.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Molly. Any other questions before we kind of move into the special sauce? Well, think about them. We'll talk a little bit about this now, and we have a little bit of time. So, Margie, take it away.
Okay, so listen, some of you may watch television like I do. And on television, McDonald's often has commercials, and they often used to talk about their secret sauce. But we're talking about a completely different secret sauce than what McDonald's uses on its yucko hamburgers. Don't disrespect McDonald's. That's what this secret sauce is here. And this came out of what we learned in our case studies that we did with Haas Jr. and in our discussions with people during the survey. And I wanted to see how this resonated with all of you as well. So one of those things is integration. That nobody on the whole team of the staff can say, oh, fundraising, that's not our job. That belongs over here. And I know that because I teach, train, and coach social justice groups how to raise money, that still happens a lot. That's fundraising's team. That's somebody else's team. Oh, I'm a director who's involved in program. I don't do fundraising. You have to have integration. Everybody has to see this work as part of their work. They don't have to be the people running it, but they have to say, me too. I'm showing up for the fundraising part of this. So it's integration. Likewise, the communications department needs to be able to count on the fundraising department, and policy and program need to know that when they're doing their work, we're going to be there and tell their story really well. So we got to do this integration. We have to trust each other. We have to hire people, and we have to have people on the board that we can trust to do this work together. It used to be, and I saw a session this morning that highlighted this, that one person held the message. And we know now that many people, many of our members, many of the community are holding myriad messages that talk about our work in a good way. And I support that. I think that's really good. But we have to trust that we've given people the information that they're going to need, board members are going to need in order to talk about the work in the best way they can and to help bring other money into this. So we need integration and we need trust.
And Margie, I would also add trust.
Yep.
The data. What's the data telling you about what messages are working?
Good. So Robert, say more about that.
Yeah. So as you saw with the NILC example and others, they knew that their newsletter wasn't being opened. They could see the data. They knew that potential donors weren't necessarily being responsive or following through, taking action or writing checks. So the data doesn't lie. So the metrics were there. They knew that they were being presented with evidence that suggested they need a new approach. And that's where the risk came in, and they took it. And it resulted in tremendous success.
So I think that's really, really good point to lift up. And I wanted you to say more about it because I'm so pleased that we have executive directors on this call and people do fundraising and a lot of people who are responsible for digital work for the organization. And so that proof and what people can find out, how they can trust the data and what the data is telling them, I'm thinking that is a really great bridge for some of you on this call to help with the fundraising because of the work that you're doing. So I think that's really helpful. And a lot of the fundraisers that I talk to say, well, we want to know that stuff, we don't know how, but you do. A lot of digital people do know how to do that. This could be a place to suggest it. Let's look at that. Let's find out whether that newsletter is just falling on deaf ears. Doesn't mean don't do a newsletter. It means let's adjust how we write it, who we write it to, how we talk about things. And then finally, in the secret sauce for building power and money is raising money to build communities, movements, and power. Not just our separate organizations, but the whole thing. A lot of times when a donor wants to give, it helps if you bring it down to a family, a person, a student who's been affected by DACA, but in a way that says, if we pass this bill, all these people will be in a much better place. So it's raising money to build communities, getting over our fear of asking for money because we believe in this work and these things that are going on and want to spark that thinking for you. We had 2 questions that have come in that maybe build on some of these things. Rachel says, some organizations feel like they have to have a different voice, quote unquote, altogether for communication to donors and others. But are you, Robert and Margie, suggesting they're not so separate and how to navigate this? Robert, you want to say something about that?
I would say a couple things in this. That's a great question, Rachel. So on one hand, you do want to segment your message. You want to target the audience with a message that's appropriate to them, and you know it's going to resonate them based on what their priorities are, based on the information you have about them, based on their previous giving, and based on what messages have worked in the past. So that's one piece. But in general, I don't think they're so separate. I think that, you know, especially when you're engaging in values-based messaging, like, for example, you know, mutual caring as a value, I don't think the donor is going to relate any different to that value than, let's say, a frontline activist or someone you're trying to get to write a member of Congress, or a person directly affected by the issue, say an undocumented immigrant. So I think it's really knowing. I don't think they're so separate. I think it's really being smart on which one to use when to which audience.
So I want to yellow highlight what Robert said. I think knowing your audience, knowing your donor, knowing what they're interested in, knowing which part of your work is a bridge to that donor's values and what they care about will make that difference. But if you're going to write to a congressperson, you might speak in a way that's different than the way you speak to the donor and get somebody engaged. You might tell a slightly different story, but I think it should always be related to what's going to build your work through the bridge you're going to make to that audience, and being mindful about what you want that person, that audience, that newspaper editor, what do you want them to do? And then making that strong. We had 2 other questions. We have about 3 minutes left to do this. One is, how would you know if your donors come online? And we also, before that, had sometimes organizers keep donors to their campaigns themselves. How do you overcome internal turf issues like that? I would say that you don't want to have turf issues. It's got to start at the top. The ED should not encourage people to be acting in a turf way. Secondly, you want to find out where do you think that donor is most likely to make her biggest donation to all the parts of your work. Hopefully general support, but you might want to lead with the certain story and make that happen. And even though I kind of like friendly competition sometimes in fundraising, you don't want to have it be that different departments, you know, would say, oh, you can't go to Ford, you can't talk to that donor because we're already going to do that for this work. You want to figure it out together strategically. Who's got the closest relationship? Where do we think that place is more likely to give? And how are we going to do that in the best way possible? Robert, what would you add to that?
I would say that if you learn one thing about the integrated approach that we've emphasized here, that integration transcends the turfs. And if the functions are operating in silos and comms people aren't really talking to the policy advocacy people, who aren't really talking to the Devo people, something's not right there. That's just not the way it should be happening. And that's common sense. So I think the best way to show how this works is through that NILC example, where NILC itself changed the culture of the organization and how it approached. NILC managed to persuade lawyers, highly successful litigators, very powerful people, how to talk in a way and use their voice that wasn't lawyerly. And no offense against lawyers, people, okay? So, but the point is that they changed the culture of one group of people who you could say were in their own specific silo, the legal team, and were able to engage in them in a way where they become powerful messengers for the organizations using a different kind of voice, or not a different kind of voice, a voice that was more empowered and enhanced by bringing in a different way of talking about the issues.
And Robert, before we lose, we're in our last minute. I know our host is going to cut us off for this part. I wanted you to speak to the person who asked the question about how can you tell who's come online? You are raising a really, really good point.
Yeah.
Sometimes the donor is just lost to you who that person's name is. But there are ways now, if you do peer-to-peer fundraising, to capture their names, even a screen capture when they've made their donation, to save those names and to find out as much as you can how these people are coming on and who they are and how to talk to them. And I'm with you. It's frustrating where some of that is just lost. So Robert, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you have any information, you have to follow up with them, and you have to follow up with a thank you message. And then you have to follow up possibly with, get them in your database and follow up with messages that probe what their interests are, so that you can prioritize those next time you reach out to that person.
So we're at 4:50, Robert, and in Eastern time. Robert and I can stay on the call for a few minutes. I want to thank everybody for coming on this call. I'm sorry that, or this webinar, I'm sorry that it was hard for some of you to get on. I think a lot of people had trouble getting on, but I'm glad you made it. I want to give you positive vibes from Brooklyn and San Francisco to go out there and do great communication and great fundraising, and so glad you were here. Robert, can you put our last slide on?
Yeah, hold on.
And I would welcome you to contact me. Robert would welcome you to contact him to ask any questions or to talk to us further about this work. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, and we're happy to send the PowerPoint presentation. You see our emails there. Just leaving it up for a second for you to write them down. I believe they are also available through the bio presenter page of Netroots Nation. So if you reach out to Margie and me, we will send these out. And if the interest is high enough, we'll just make them available on a particular web platform and release them that way. But for now, reach out directly. We'd love to hear from you anyways, what you thought about this.
Yes, I'd like to get your evaluation of this. I want to thank Omar again for being our tech person, and we can hang out for another 5 minutes or so if you have any other questions to say, and if you have to race off to another workshop, have at it. That's really wonderful. Thank you again to Netroots Nation for hosting us for this work. So why don't we stay till, I don't know, we can give it 2 minutes or so.
One chat, let's see. Rachel to all panelists, thank you. Thanks, Rachel. Adela, thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Great. Thanks so much. This was great. We got a lot of good thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Margie.
And you too. From development, from Tim, from Molly, from Kim, Adela. Great. Well, we had 96 at the end signed up. So, and even if half of them were going to listen to the live presentation, I feel bad that they had a challenge getting on.
Yeah.
I know that happens though.
It sounded like they had to jump through a little bit of a technical hoop around.
Yeah, I think so.
Clicking on something else that wasn't evident.
Yeah, well, there may be more people that decide to go on and go get it live. We still have people that are on here. Any of you people that are still on, do you want to ask any question or have any comment? Happy to hear from you.
Anyone need any coaching on comms and fundraising? Raise your hand. Well, we might as well then sign out unless anyone.
Wait, somebody started to say something. Omar, was that you?
Yeah, that was me. I could even just put someone's mic on if they want to ask directly rather than typing.
Oh, how do we do that?
I think I can do it.
Okay, yeah, put their mic on.
Is there anyone in particular, or just turn on everybody who's left?
Yeah, turn on everybody.
Let's see.
Brianna, Ashley. Who else is here? Kim. Any comments or questions?
Let's see.
They may have just left their screen on, you know, but not there now. Rob, okay. I got here late, so I missed a lot. Brianna, it's been taped, so you'll be able to see it and get them. I'm happy to give you the materials. Vince, so glad to see you here. Wonderful. Vince Warren is the director of Center for Constitutional Rights, who is one of the sponsors of Netroots Nation. And Vince, are you saying something? All right, well, I think we can say goodbye to everybody now, Robert. What do you think? And just leave this up?
Yeah, okay.
Good.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Omar. Appreciate it. Have a great, fabulous
so
rest of
much.
your Network Nation.
Yes, and be in touch.
Yay.
And good luck to everybody. Bye.
Stay strong.
Bye. Yeah, stay strong. You know what to do in November. All right. All right, Robert, I'm going to sign off.